David Tim, and I'm the chair. Today, we're discussing the budgets, among other items. We currently have quorum. We got John Reynolds, Griffin Cabal, Sarah Lanford, Kirat Mukherjee, and Andrew Ferreira. So I don't believe we have any public comments, and I don't see anyone online, so we can skip right past that to approval of the meeting minutes. My only comment is that my name has 2 M's in it, and that's the only typo.
I believe a name with 4 letters.
Yeah. I'm sure it's an autocorrect issue. It's a constant.
That's the same thing with me with the EI, but
Yeah. Yep.
We get the EI correct?
yes, yes, you have the EI correct. Yes.
Are there any other edits for commissioners?
Because I go to approve with the 1 edits, the chair's name.
It's good in certain places, but not in the very first. Commissioners present, they might get confused and think that there's another David Tim. All right, can I get a second? Second. All right, any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries the day, and we can move along. Budget is next, correct, Geraldo? Thank you. Did everyone have a chance to review the budget that was provided? I think if you just look at, in fact, would you mind pulling up the Housing Commission's recommendations? I think let's just go through it line by line, because at the beginning, they have a pretty good analysis of housing related spending or funding. And I think, we can talk about their recommendations and whether we support any of them, but it's just a good summary in general. So there it is up on the screen now. You can zoom in a little bit, that'd be great.
Maybe to speak a little.
Okay. Not usually accused of speaking too softly. All right. Yep. So housing grants. We're looking at a pretty, modest increase to the budget for housing grants. I had a conversation with Ann Venezia shortly after the budget came out, and overall, everything is either staying the same or slightly getting an increase. And that's very encouraging to me. Arlington County has done a really good job, I think, over the last few years, especially with COVID, in maintaining housing spending. They've got this new pilot program for youth aging out of foster care. And I recall Ann was particularly excited about that. And then the 2 new positions, those are full-time positions, also are fantastic. So I will say, as we go through this, and anyone feel free to stop me and if you've got a comment on any specific item. But whenever we actually get to comments to the county manager on the budget, he asks us, not just me, okay, if you want an increase, where would you cut? And so that's just something to keep in mind. Almost nobody ever proposes cuts to budgets. So if there is something that you think that there's an opportunity to cut in, that is almost as valuable as proposing increases, at least in terms of the county manager's perspective.
I don't know if this is fine, but I'd be interested to know what the difference in funding would be to allow recipients of housing grants to only pay 30% instead of 40% of their income towards that. Because fourth bullet,
Yeah,
notice that they'd approved the ability to cut the tenant burden down to 30%. But I assume it's a funding issue that's keeping that at 40.
yeah,
I don't know if we can figure out kind of what that, how to quantify that, if that's, I assume that's something that's been done as part of the budget cut.
yeah, I'm sure. Well,
But I'd be interested to kind of just see what that difference is, just to see how big of the gap there really is.
And does the accounting take into account inflation? I know AMI changes year to year, but I mean, we had those recent reports just this past week that for it to live at least comfortably and not having to worry about paycheck, you have to be at 99,000.
Yeah.
So to expect someone to pay 40% and they should be at 30, like that's food out of someone's mouth. And I know the administration, like the federal government, is trying to put more credits and restore the child tax credit. If we could do our part.
Okay.
So there is the housing grant study is just completed and we are actually going to get a presentation. at April. So that question can perhaps be answered if it's not there, but I
Okay.
will certainly raise it.
Yeah.
Bring it to Nicole and HS instruction.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Rhoda, can we see if we can, or I can reach out to Anne if she has it, or you can, to just get that stat before I go to the meeting with the county manager? Okay, I think that's a great point. All right. Yep. And projected number of households served increases 5%. I think we can move to the next point, Rhoda.
I think a new page down.
Oh,
Will they- Yeah.
great. Oh, and welcome, Kristen.
Hi there. Yeah.
We're discussing the budget. So as I said earlier to the other commissioners, the thing that the county manager always wants to know is where would we cut, if anywhere? And seldom does anyone in those meetings have a response, but I do think that I do think that it's helpful if we talk about it in those terms. All right, so permanent supportive housing again is getting a very slight increase, and I guess the question in terms of like inflation is how close is it? It's probably pretty close to dead on, to be honest. But either way, it's essentially flat. We are moving up 20 contracted units, which is modest, but good. Any comments on permanent supportive housing? Okay. All right, so eviction prevention is a big change, but I've been told that the change is mostly that the former funding was mostly in temporary, as it was temporary funding as opposed to ongoing funds. And so the way that Anne Natsia explained it to me is that the temporary funding and the overall is going down, but that in actuality, if you look at, pre-COVID years, the ongoing funds are going to be a good bit higher than normal. We just had the report from LSNV on evictions going up in his estimate. I know our subcommittee is working to try and get better statistics and pull together statistics from different places. So, this is one of those projects where I think that it's possible we could have better insight next year for the budget on if there's a funding gap and how we might advocate to meet that. Andrew?
When reviewing the budget, the one-time funding, is that grants? Is it a one-time from like a strategic reserve? It doesn't denote where it's being appropriated.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Rolla, do you have any idea?
No, what sometimes it is because it is from
Mhm.
general. But I can't say for certain that this specific item that
Is it-
is where the funding is coming from.
Cause it's like, is it leftover federal grant money from COVID that they were using it up? That's why it's still there. That's.
So I don't know, but I can ask about again. Where the one-time funding is coming from, but that's often the case. But there tends to be many, if you were to look at previous budgets, there are areas within there where you see one-time.
Is that would be helpful regarding if we did want to recommend a cut, but if it's a grant, why would you cut
Right,
that?
of course. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think we can add that to the questions for Anne or for whoever's best positioned to ask that ahead of our my upcoming meeting with the county board, if that's okay. Yeah, we'll go to the next item.
And I should believe the 1,000 office
This is the tenant landlord commission. meeting.
100. From 100.
from
100.
100. I look at this 100 Clarendon Boulevard, Suite 1000.
So what are you here for?
Yes, we have a hearing.
I'm not sure.
Qué oficina?
So there's 311 upstairs. And then 100 would be across.
It's the zoning appeals.
It's probably in the count.
It's next piece.
Gracias.
Go ahead, ascensor que está en final de la calle.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, look at us answering questions from the public outside of public comment.
I hope it's the third floor.
It's like 307 on the paper.
All right, so AHIF. 20.5 million in funding for AHIF, which is 10.5 of ongoing funding plus 10 million in one-time funding. And this is a significant increase from previous years of about $5 million.
But mostly because of the park run.
I think that, yeah, that's the biggest portion of it.
Notice that the bar crop is in the next line too, in the TIF.
It isn't both.
Yeah, I think it's related to both.
Okay.
Obviously, you know, the county's like one of the biggest investments it's made in recent years is Barcroft. And, you know, we hear from them fairly often here at TLC. As far as I can tell, things have been going well with Barcroft. So, you know, I'm happy that they made that investment. I know it was a little bit controversial at the beginning. Some people were worried about how much was being spent, but locking up that much affordable housing for 99 years is just fantastic. Any other thoughts or comments on AF funding?
Just one quick question. Do you know what the CH abbreviation is? The other project is
Oh, is that Clarence?
Still house.
Crystal House?
Crystal House, right? Okay, we'll go to the next item. Okay, so the Columbia Pike tax increment financing area. A lot of this is Barcroft debt servicing. And in my discussion with Anne, Is this where they are doing the 50? No. Ann told me separately that they're also proposing $15 million for principal pay down on the county's line of credit for Barcroft.
That was in the previous one, the AF.
It's no, it's also here, it says 2 million that is allocated to debt service.
Yeah, 2 million.
Probably listed here too, because this is, it's on.
Oh,
Columbia, please.
yeah, so
There's TLC, which is a separate funding, type of,
Special tax.
tool that is used along Columbia Pike. And in addition to the aid that's assigned to Barcroft, so it's two sets of funding.
Mhm.
yeah, the AF was that 15 million principal payouts.
Right.
Is that part of the form-based code?
Yes.
Columbia, but
Tax and, yeah, the difference. Tied into the form base.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Kristen has a comment.
Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, are these two positions that we're funding for CPHD, are these new positions or existing funding, positions that, weren't, budgeted somewhere else?
Sorry, where are you referring to?
The second one.
Right up at the top.
At the end.
So I'm not aware of these two new positions. I do know that there are two positions that are vacant. So maybe that funding is being held for those positions when they become, when they're about to pull them, they are coming vacant.
So how long have the positions been vacant? I guess if we're looking for places where we might trim, I mean, and I'm not saying that this is a good idea, I'm just talking out loud, is that if we've had two positions that have been vacant for 2 years and we're continuing to go on, and function, albeit maybe, not perfectly, is this an area, it wouldn't be a whole lot of money, I would presume, I mean, in the whole scheme of things, but it's
Yeah,
always nice to offer up something, or
yeah,
at least make people think, why aren't these positions filled?
I think it's a good question. Can we add it to those for Ann or the appropriate party? So we can find that out before our meeting.
So we would be wanting to know whether these vacant positions are unfilled or
If they're vacant or new,
they're not new positions.
they're not new. Okay, so then the question is, how long have they been open? And those aren't the two new positions that we discussed earlier with the 230,000, right? They're not the same.
No, they did prior positions, they were related to yes, this House of Grants.
Yeah, I was just making sure.
It's just CPH.
One more follow-up though for the positions also, since they've been vacant, who has been doing the job? Has there been any like bandwidth issues?
Yeah.
Because if it's like, oh no, it's only added 5-10% more, then it's like, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Let's go to the next item. Hector? Yep, so we've got another flat line item, and honestly, Office of Human Rights, I think housing included this because they've got a special connection with human rights related to fair housing. I don't really have much comments on it. I mean, it's staying essentially flat over 3-year period. So I don't know. I know they have a recommendation. We can talk about it later on related to fair housing, but I don't have any other comments on this. So we can move to the next one.
Is that the 46,000?
Yeah. Okay, so CAF inspections, I mean, this is an area that Arlington was pretty proud of, I think. So they inspected more units than they ever have before, and I mean, this like connects to some of the broader goals of the TLC, but like they're definitely collecting quite a bit of data. So let's make sure that the subcommittee makes a note to keep them on the radar and make sure that we talk to them about what they're collecting, where they're keeping it, and whether it talks to anything else in the county. Because I know it's through a contractor, and that could create difficulties. You know, depending on how the contractor is required, you know, in their contract to keep the data. It's possible that it could like evaporate if it's not correctly protected.
That overseen by Eric.
It's overseen by our housing division, yes, the unit within. Not just that,
Okay.
two other inspectors.
Yeah, I was just saying, because he was super talking about the subcommittee.
Yeah, he's
A
covering his
decent amount with, with the CAF inspection. Done.
It's actually Jonathan, and he reported on it above.
Okay.
Now we have that.
Okay.
Is 2,200 a high watermark or is that a goal?
I think they did inspect 2,200 last year, if I'm not mistaken, and the goal is the same this year.
Well, it's a fine in FY20.
Right, so they, yeah. Yeah,
And
So
so
that's
how,
what was allocated.
and so how often are they touching the remaining? Or expecting them? Like if it's 2,200, what's the cadence of that
Right.
apartment being?
what
inspected?
percentage are being inspected on a yearly basis? Yeah, that's a good question.
I think it's X.
Okay,
That we can verify.
yeah, would you add that to the questions?
So it's every decade basically they checked.
What's the question? Okay.
So it seems like it's every decade if it's 10% of all the units. Every year they're being inspected.
Yes,
So these-
that was recently been started in terms of that. Because we have this third party inspection.
Yeah, I mean, this is an area when I looked at the budget that I thought we're doing so much more and like we should be proud of ourselves, but we shouldn't stop, especially given like how much it costs. Really not a
Yeah.
large part of the budget whatsoever. For instance, like we were talking about those two open positions. If, you know, it's $200,000 for those two open positions, and we find out that the bandwidth of those jobs being done is not overloading other county staff, then I would be interested in recommending to double or more the CAF inspections, because to your point, 10% is not very
Well,
much.
I feel like also then that leads you possibly into a problem if you're not knowing about it until a decade later.
Yeah,
I feel like a cadence of 5 years is probably a little bit more acceptable. So yeah, if you double that
right.
and are able to do 20% of all the units,
And it's kind of a drop in the bucket.
I feel like that's more of an amenable edit to the budget and therefore provides equitable housing across. 'Cause at least you feel like you know this, at least in the past 4 or 5 years, like at least one presidential term has gone by. Your apartments.
That's a good point. Okay, so we'll move along to homelessness. Hector, would you down just a little further? All right, so we're adding 500,000 to enhance case management at the shelters and bed capacity. And we're up to 4.9 million. I don't recall if we know what the homelessness services was at prior. But we don't have that number here, do we?
No,
No, that simulation is provided by insurance. Present on their budget. That's the two. Just put together that.
Can we just double check ahead of my meeting whether this is staying flat or if it sounds like it's an increase because the ad's 500,000, but I just want to make sure. I think when I talked with Ann, she was pretty pleased with the level of funding here. You know, homelessness is something that Arlington County takes really seriously, so. Any other comments on homelessness?
Do you know what our homelessness rate?
I don't. Did we talk about that a couple months ago? At a makeup? No.
No, but again, we have DHS coming, going to be, they're the same persons. who can speak to them.
Okay. All right, housing choice vouchers. And yeah, I mean, this is right. This is something I need to discuss. Some overall notes on the budget that I had from Anne. She said that about 8% of the budget is investments of the entire county budget. It's investment in housing affordability. And that is a significant increase over the 6% of the county budget that was allocated to the same overall general affordable housing investments from last year. So I think, you know, again, my conversation with her, I didn't find a lot to nitpick, and she seems pretty happy. And when, you know, those things come together, it's generally good. I did want to just like roll through what housing was recommending and see whether there was anything that we wanted to double down on with them, because we often have pretty good shared goals. Hector, would you pull that back up and show their recommendations? So I think their first one was to increase AHIF funding to 30 million. And that was focused on ensuring increases in the CAF supply. And specifically, they were concerned about some upcoming redevelopments for CAFs that are at risk of not having enough AHIF funding. There it is. And again, so we're talking about AHIF funding, which is going to be at 20 million or 20.4. So they want a very big increase to it. I'll have to talk with Kellen to see if they had any stats for picking that very round number or not. I'm not opposed to, you know, joining them and asking for an increase, but I'm always mindful that the county manager is like, okay, so where are you going to find the difference in the rest of the budget?
It's also, it goes back to the original question, for these taxes raised by Arlington, or the
Right.
grants from Richmond, or the funds coming from?
Yeah.
To make the difference for the 10 million.
Yeah, I agree. Any other thoughts on increasing AF funding?
Yeah, I'm supportive of increasing it based on, especially when it calls out construction costs and interest rates, which I think is something that Brian had mentioned the last time we were
Right.
here. Since there's only one landlord here, I wanted to,
Yeah.
one landlord representative here, speaking of Brian. Probably say Brian.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts before we move on to next one? Great. Their second is to provide adequate funding for the long-term strategies for improved oversight, tenant supported aging CAF properties. So the Serrano report increased staffing for CPHD housing division, including a deputy director position, and increased funding for the formation and support of resident councils at CAF properties. So the second of those two, we're going to discuss an article that Sarah passed along about civic engagement and resident councils. I think that that's another area where TLC can be, pushing for the development of these, especially at CAF properties. I'm always curious, like how involved residents will actually be in them, but if you get some good leaders at the property, then it can be really effective. And one of the things that I've thought about with this, and we can get into this discussion later or now if you want, but the possibility of having like a direct pipeline from the resident councils to TLC to streamline issues so that individual residents don't have to go, maybe I don't know about TLC, maybe I can make it to their one public meeting a month to talk about my questions and ask, what they can help me with. But if they have a resident council that has a direct line to us and can contact us at any time, talk about broader issues and trends at each individual property, I think that could be a much more effective way of dealing with public comments on a broader scale. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I know in the other document we have from Jerry Lynch that they said the residents council was established.
Yeah, I was gonna-
Rob, so I'd be interested to see how that's going
Yeah,
as it's studied.
If it is what?
As a study.
They are meeting on a regular basis. There's at least one per month that they're meeting. In terms of consistency of attendance, there's a question there. There's always consistent attendance. So it's new. And so it's going through the growing pains. So it varies in time. That was. I've given an update on. But he is helping the formation of structure.
I missed who's helping.
Attendance.
So
Attendance is
yeah, I guess for me, from a structural perspective, for bylaws, is it formal? Is there a chair or they just decide to convene on Tuesday afternoon?
So I don't know that they are at the point of formation of bylaws of that.
My experience having attended at the Shelton, at the Serrano, is that the meetings were,
There
there were resident meetings, but they were held by the like the management announced, like, you're gonna have this room. And then they allowed people to say whatever they wanted to say, but so if it's a resident council, I don't know, it says formation, so I guess the idea is that the meeting,
They're independent.
everything about the meeting would be, the residents would be controlling everything about the meeting, which would certainly be something new for most properties.
Yeah,
Because, I mean, you gotta get a room, right? I mean, the management has to be, so,
Yeah.
You can't just, unless you're gonna meet outside, it's for, meet out before you're, you have to have some cooperation, so I think that's an open question.
This is actually something, so I'm part of Arlington leadership and part of the group for about renter engagement with the county. And that's actually a proposal we're putting together to actually offer towards the commission of actually how to get people who rent in Arlington more engaged is actually through this program right here. So I know this is an area that they definitely have a big focus on. It's just like, okay, well, how do we do that? But, because you have to start somewhere, right? But I think this is like one of the ways we get involved. It's just, we get there. It's kind of cool that different areas now seeing this as like a facilitation.
yeah. Well, I think at minimum, we can, putting aside the budget for a quick second, we can reach out to Saul and to the Barcroft, whoever's leading the Barcroft resident council, and, ask them how it's going. We could talk to them about what's working and what isn't, and then put together some sort of report for the county to talk about this being done at other CAF properties.
I think one of the things coming out of this, like anything else, it's driven by people generally. Many of these meetings, they come about because there's a problem with
Right.
issues. And so people, they coalesce around the issues. And so that's when something maybe happens. What this is though, it's a more consistent, having a meeting, a structure. That you're meeting every, month or whatever. And there's difficulty with that because if people are working, different times, shifts, whatever, you may not get that consistency all the time. And then people may not feel, oh, we're doing okay, so there are no problems. There is that, unfortunately, that's just the way that
Yeah.
it's worked.
If there's no issue to
But I
call
don't
us.
think that should be the rule,
Right.
right?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's like the flip side is right, then if they are meeting regularly and there aren't really any issues, then who cares? But if there's a regular meeting and then there are some issues that come up, then they come to the regular meeting and it's a proactive
And
thing.
there's a community who can approach the problem instead of one person.
Yeah.
There's people the building, you have their phone numbers. I've done it in my building, so I know how important it is.
You have a resident council at your
Well,
building, or-
no, just in terms of like pulling everyone together and asking them a question over text is like, it's not the ideal way to, like, if we have, there's only 15 residents in the building, but like, if we had that forum, it would be.
Kristen, at any of your properties, are there organizations like this?
No, not at all.
Okay,
And I guess one thing to add also is that I'll come back.
all right, yeah, the next, you got
I
it?
remember, yeah. If management is involved or as well, like, are they active partner or they just give them a room and excuse themselves?
Right.
That's the other.
I don't think we know the answer to that right now.
Yeah.
Well, to an extent, I don't know which one.
Yeah, which one would be the
Yeah.
best situation? If
Yeah.
management, if people may feel, they don't
But
want it.
it's human nature, the controversy. And at the Serrano, I can't remember her name, but there was an activist that was getting the residents to come to this meeting, like telling them, you need to come and you need to speak out. And she's spoken in our commission meetings. I'm blanking on her name, but there was somebody actively knocking on doors, telling people, you gotta come, you gotta come to this meeting and you gotta speak up.
Yeah.
And you gotta, so that's just the way it works.
Because according to these notes, it says Chair Lynch was invited. But it seems like it's more closed and separated and so.
Yeah, I haven't attended the Barcroft meeting, but I was just speaking general about Serrano. It's a good idea. I think we need to find out some more detail.
Yeah.
They say funding it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, what is the
unclear to
funding
me.
that
Yeah.
people require at the state?
I don't know that any funding is really necessary until we come up with a more formal idea of what we would be asking for.
I think it's more so if there's a communal space that's if it's publicly available, if the property does not want to offer a communal space for them to convene.
Yeah. I think in Charlotte, in this particular case, there is support from
Right,
management. They have provided them with facilities. Of course, at Barcroft, there's limited amenities and everything. So whatever small room might be available, as far as I understand, they have.
yeah,
So I'm talking about replicating it. If you go to different properties, they might not have a communal space. You might just be meeting in the driveway, parking lot. So
Not in cap properties. Cap properties do have a dedicated.
Yeah,
Oh, so it's good to know.
usually. They do usually.
I don't know of any.
No, they do usually.
but I think that would also involve county regulations, basically say if they want to convene, you must permit them to meet.
I think this has given me a lot to think about. I think this is something that is appropriate for the subcommittee that's pulling together, that Andrew's heading, that's pulling together, what sort of resources exist, what are, is this part of Arlington County, holding statistics on this, and we could make this part of our recommendations that comes out of that, whatever report that ultimately looks like. Does that make sense to you, Andrew?
Mhm.
So I think the first thing on that agenda, and not necessarily on the whole subcommittee's agenda, but is getting a hold of Barcroft and their resident council and seeing what's going on there. How's it working, and whether it's going well, or if there is even a need for us to be intervening.
And I was actually thinking ahead to when I know Jared Lynch would come for phase 2. That was one of my questions, like how did phase 1 go?
Yeah,
And also hear from the residents, because I mean, I know they produce the reports and they are compliant, but there's difference from being compliant and being satisfactorily delivering services to the residents.
yeah,
I think we have to be careful on how we pose those questions, though. Not to put a bias towards the residents to think that there might be something wrong. Just, I guess, from a landlord perspective, if Jared Lynch is doing 40% of what they say they're doing, seems to me we're moving in a very good direction. And I think we want to just couch our questions in a fairly positive and forward-moving perspective, as opposed to looking backwards and negative.
yeah. I mean, I don't think the questions that we'd be asking is just what are your resident council meetings look like? What's the attendance like? Where do complaints go to? If there are any, what are they discussing at the resident council? I assume it's mostly going to be complaints with the building and the management. Like, I don't know. I guess they could just be talking about how much they love their home, but something tells me that's not what it is.
That's not. Good job.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they're talking about football. I don't know. They talk about anything, but yeah, I take your point though, Kristen.
They could be organizing like, community events too. So it's not just the negative. They're not just.
Well, and the report
Yeah.
we got from Dry Lynch is from Dry Lynch, right?
Right.
So I want to know, this looks great. Dry Lynch says it looks great.
Yeah.
I read it, I said, wow, if this is all happening, this is fantastic.
Mhm.
And I want to know the residents' perspective, without having to frame that in any type of way this meeting. And I don't think we would.
No.
But I'd like to say, what's your experience been? That's a pretty neutral way to get information, I think.
Yeah, and I think Saul can be helpful in this as well. Has he come to any of the subcommittee meetings
He
yet?
came in.
That was-
February, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, so you could reach out to him as well, to talk about that specifically. All right. For provide funding to modernize housing grants IT system.
Makes common sense.
Sounds good to me, but fairly non-specific, which is fine. Any thoughts on that before I move on? Okay. Adequate funding for the implementation of the county's. Did I?
Yeah, those about.
Fair housing.
Oh,
Oh.
excuse me. Can we
Go back up, Hector.
Right, stop right there.
Okay, so adequate funding for the regional fair housing plan, which has already been approved by the board. The first bullet point is provide additional funding to the Office of Human Rights to do expanded fair housing testing in 2025. And the second is to provide additional funding to the Office of Human Rights to expand enforcement of source of funds protection. So I know this is something that the Housing Commission's been working on pretty extensively. We haven't really touched this here at TLC. Are there any thoughts on that? Or
It seems more like housing's purview.
yeah, that's my feeling as well. So Okay, well, we can leave that with them then.
Just think staff has a different opinion. Things that should be right in.
I was about to say, I feel like B could fall under
Provide fair housing.
Tenants being-
Landlords.
tenants being denied housing based on the source of income as voucher.
Access.
Okay,
And it was an area that was discussed, it started off.
we had a subcommittee
We had a-
discussing
this-
source of funds. We ultimately made a recommendation on that, right? To the county board.
I think so.
I think Emily was involved in that.
The very first iteration of the committee, that
Right,
was its first, well, yes.
We did. Check it.
let's get that report back or whatever work products we got from that subcommittee and revisit it at the next meeting.
The board chairs.
All right, well, Maureen, we're gonna get you in just a second. We're gonna just try and wrap up, going through the Housing Commission's recommendations here regarding the budget.
It's all good. Take your time.
Thank you. All right, so 5 was adequate funding for the implementation of the county strategic plan to end homelessness in the next 4 years. So we talked about the homelessness aspect of the budget. I do think this one is more clearly housing than it is TLC, to the extent that those people who are homeless are being rehoused in CAFs or, and then they become part of the rental population in TLC, then that they're no longer homeless and then they're sort of within our purview more. That's my feeling on it. Are there any other thoughts?
No,
I just feel like that's a reachable end homelessness. It's not like I mean, there's actually a case going, I think, before the Supreme Court. It's in Washington State regarding homelessness. So curious to see how that goes in this circuit.
All right, the last number then is providing adequate funding for regular equity analysis for all housing and planning projects. Yeah, I mean, this is something that we adopted a similar thing, like essentially a policy position as Housing Commission on integrating into all of our discussions DEI. And so I think more analysis is better. That's part of our big push for this subcommittee that we have going this year. But I don't know what adequate funding for that looks like. Maybe we can ask for a staff recommendation on the topic.
I don't know, these recommendations. We didn't have, there was no comment by staff.
Staff was not consulted.
There we go.
Okay. Well, do you think that that's something that we could get from staff at a presentation in the next couple of months?
Sorry, rephrase that for me again, what is it?
Number 6.
That's something that's ongoing for the department in terms of equity analysis. Looking to do that across the board on the various programs, planning as well as the. And so you're asking.
Well, if there's some sort of discussion that the staff are having on what funding could be required for doing these equity analyses, that's something we'd be interested in. I guess just, reach out and see if there's a discussion about a shortfall going on there. Whether it's like bringing in a contractor to do the analysis, or if you guys are doing it. So we haven't, I don't have a clear idea of what it would look like, but
I can ask Sydney, right? Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
All right, so let's sort of summarize budget discussions and then move on. So we have a bunch of questions that we'll be getting answers to prior to the meeting with the county manager. It sounds like in particular, we wanted to know about those 2 vacant positions and whether those funds could be transferred to fund additional CAF inspections. And I do think that, at least in my opinion, doing additional CAF inspections through a contractor makes good sense, especially given how, what percentage are actually being inspected every year, and the fact that it comes out to once every 10 years seems not sufficient, and it's not a
What is
large,
meant by comes out once every 10 years?
Because there's a-
certain evidence on it.
right, and the number of CAF units that are being inspected yearly is 10%.
Apartments, so we can verify that.
Yeah, so but that means that ultimately each unit is on average being inspected every 10 years.
That's what you.
If the program continues.
Right.
Yeah.
If it
For
keeps
30
the
years,
exact same
Over
amount,
30 years,
percentage.
The same
So,
unit will be inspected 3 times. Theoretically,
yeah, I would prefer that it would be a much shorter cadence,
Yeah.
than a decade.
I mean, and there is a potential complicating factor too, where certain units might be inspected more than once every 10 years because of complaints or whatever reason, which could reduce overall units being inspected even less than once every 10 years. So I do think that that's like the biggest takeaway that I had from
well, it seems like very cost effective.
Mhm.
exactly
What you-
the cost to benefit analysis. Maybe we could get a presentation on the CAF inspections from, I don't know if the contractor can do that or if someone else in staff would be more appropriate. Rollo, what do you think?
There's an inspector who gives regular reports.
Do you think that they could come to an upcoming TLC meeting?
I can certainly, Marie Randall, she is supervisor.
Okay, great. Anything else related to the budget?
So the funding, so whether or not it's grants, tax,
Oh, yeah,
appropriations for Richmond, it just says one-time funding,
right.
so. It's like, if it's a grant, it's like, okay, I understand you got it for 1 year.
General funds.
Yeah,
Those
general.
are not grant funding. The grant funding areas are generally CDBG type funding. Goes towards lots of services provided by nonprofit. So this, when we talk about the budget, it's primarily
And the,
Okay.
and the one-time funding is the strategic reserve that it's tapping into.
maybe being funds left of previous.
So if we just get clarification on
Yeah,
where
just to break down.
yeah, which pot of money it's coming.
Okay. All right, well, I think we can conclude the budget discussion and turn the floor over to Ms. Coffey, if you're ready.
Yeah, happy to be ready. Thank you all for having me, and sorry I hopped in late. We had a full Arlington County PTA, the association of all of the PTA's meetings tonight. So that's where I was before joining you. Otherwise I would have been with you in person, I think. But nice to meet you all. I'm Maureen. I'm one of our 2 new board members for this year, and I'm also the first ever renter that we've elected to the county board. And so I felt very passionately about getting to be the liaison for the Tenant Landlord Commission. I think it's a really important role that the county plays. And I think that there's a lot more that we can be doing in a county that's 61% renters, that really, renters are the engine driving a lot of our economy. We all, if you're on the renter side, you may not pay as much attention to the tax assessments, but single family homes went up by about 3.6% this year in terms of their total assessed value in the county, versus apartments went up about 9.5%. And so that says a lot. And, there's a lot of things that I want to do and want to focus on, but I think housing, again and again, comes to the forefront because it's just such a fundamental part of everyone's lives. It is the basis for stability or lack thereof. And I know you all, are aware of that. We're talking about rapid rehousing. We're talking about the strategic plan to end homelessness. So I will not get on my soapbox as much as to say, these things are real priorities for me, and figuring out how do we create a sustainable housing environment where people can continue to live in Arlington and be part of the community. And a big part of that for me is also on the community engagement side. How do we get people to be part of the processes that have built our community, that will continue to build our community, in a way where historically renters have not been a huge part of that conversation. I think, I actually didn't know when I found out that I would be the first elected renter in the county, it was like halfway through the primary last year, because I had just assumed that couldn't be true. I thought surely in Arlington County, someone else had been a renter. And I first talked to Katie Crystal, and she was like, no, we had just bought a condo about a year before. And then she was like, well, go talk to this person. I talked to that person. We went back to like the 90s, and it was like, no. And I think that that's kind of representative in some ways of the shift in Arlington, right? The perception of like renters being these 22-year-old fresh college grads who are just going to be here for a few years and then flit off to wherever they end up next. That's not been my experience as a renter. We have so many people who are deeply part of our community. I have friends who have rented in Arlington for 15, 20 years, and we plan to stay. And as much as we are not currently homeowners, it's not by our own choice for the most part. And so how do we create a sustainable environment, one where being a renter is not like a bad word. It doesn't imply that you've done something wrong. It doesn't imply that you're less committed to your community, but also where renters have a sustainable financial future, because frankly, as things continue along, if the prices go up the way that they are, renting is home ownership is out of reach, and soon renting is also going to be out of reach. And I'm not sure where we go from there. So that's a really big concern of mine. I am working, or I've already started having conversations with our county public engagement team, the CAPE team, about renter engagement specifically. How do we bring people into more commissions like this one, but getting people who are renters onto other commissions as well, getting younger people in, people with different perspectives. And then also when we do more of our big picture assessments, how do we bring those perspectives into those conversations as well, whether that's a site plan review committee, civic association, civic federation, or, the biggest big picture, our Arlington 2050 initiative, which is really just getting started and just kicking off, making sure that people feel comfortable voicing their opinions and their experiences. Because honestly, one of the things that I saw the most by campaigning is just, we live in very different worlds in Arlington, depending on where you're located. And I think there's an intellectual understanding of a lot of issues that are going on, whether that's affordability or environmental issues or transportation issues. And people think like, oh, sure, I know that that's going on. But when you really explain the scale or the scope of the problem in more specific terms, people don't really know. And so having that representation, just being able to voice your lived experience and what's going on has been so important. And then, prioritizing resources to get this done. I know you all were looking at the Housing Commission's budget letter. We have our CPHD and DHS work sessions tomorrow, so we'll be going through that very specific section of the budget. But, a lot of this unfortunately can't happen just by creating parameters or structures. Like, we do have to put funding behind it. We do have to have affordable housing. We have to have our housing grants and our housing choice vouchers funded, making sure that we have the rapid rehousing when someone, everything has gone off the rails. Like, that's when we need support the most. And so that is kind of my big picture as it relates to Tenant Landlord Commission. I'm happy to, I don't know if y'all have questions or if you want to chat, or I'm really open to kind of whatever works for you all. But also, I know it's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday and maybe you just want to go home. So
yeah, commissioners, if you have questions, feel free to ask that. Related to the budget,
yeah,
I assume you've had a chance to take a look at it. We just had, a detailed discussion, part of which you got to see. Is there anything that, related to TLC or housing in general that you think is wrong with the proposed budget right now?
is wrong. I'm not sure I could say if I did, but
What adjustments would you make? What positive adjustments?
What positive adjustments? I will say I was quite happy to see the amount of AHIF allocation in the budget. I know last year it was a fight to get to 18 million. And so to start off at more than 20, I think is a really good sign. And I think, frankly, a lot of that comes from the very clear conversations that myself and some of our board colleagues had with the manager before the proposed budget. I think we were all really able to say, like, this is a priority and we want to see that reflected. And so I think on the positive end, like, that was reflected. We're expanding the housing choice or the local housing vouchers. I think that's good. I think one area that I have some concerns about is the eviction prevention. We no longer have the federal funds that we had for the last few years. We are dedicating one-time funding to continue the program, but it is a lot less money because we have less funds. And so I think, what we're seeing, not just in Arlington, this is a national issue, is that as these funds have gone away, the need has continued to increase and to go up. And so funding, the fact that we have funding in there is really good, but I'm not sure if it's enough to really meet the need of where we're at. And I think we've all learned a lot over the last few years about how important the eviction prevention aspect is, and how many resources we can all save if we just make sure the eviction doesn't happen in the first place, rather than waiting for it to go through and then doing rapid rehousing and getting everyone, reset up and supported in that system. So I think that's the one area that I am feeling like I will have questions about tomorrow. And then I think the other thing that is sort of tangentially related is some of the proposed cuts are to 2 planner positions in CPHD, and one of them is in the comprehensive planning division. And I think that particularly as we're having these big picture conversations about housing and the future of Arlington, we need the capacity to really do the comprehensive planning, have professionals who have capacity. When we're having so many site plans and things come through, that draws capacity away from those more forward-looking, proactive programs. And so that's one thing I'm also definitely looking at to ask some questions about. But yeah, we have our work session tomorrow, so it'll be a good time to learn a lot more. And I will also say that going through this for the first time is a huge learning curve. They really throw so much at you, and as much as a 1,200 page binder feels like it has to have all the information in the world, what you really learn is that there's still not even enough information in there to, like, really fill out the full picture. And so I anticipate a lot more that's going to happen in the next few weeks to round out my fuller understanding of what's going on.
Yeah, we just, last month, we had a meeting with a lawyer from LSNV, deals with evictions quite a bit, and his, comments to us were also expressing a lot of concern about evictions rising right now. One of the efforts we're undertaking in our subcommittees is trying to get better eviction statistics. And, one of the things that is difficult for, I think, all sorts of people who want stats on legal related things in Virginia in general, but specifically evictions, is okay. So we have certain numbers, but not more details to tell us what happened in the outcome in any given case. And so that's one of the things we're looking into, who LSNV collects statistics, parts of Arlington County collect statistics, and I'm not sure that those are talking to each other. And so that's part of one of our biggest initiatives this year. And hopefully we'll come up with some recommendations for the county board on how to make sure that the things that we're looking at are as comprehensive as possible so that they're actionable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think another important thing on evictions is that Virginia has one of the shortest waiting periods before you can file an eviction. And so while this is, a national trend that this is happening everywhere, we have you only have to wait 7 days before you can file in court. And we all know that 7 days is not a long time. And so other states, you have to wait 2 weeks or a month even. And I think that we're going to start seeing problems faster than other states because we just have such few tenant protections in the first place. And yeah, I love the idea of getting better data, better comprehensive look at things. Because I also think a lot of stuff happens outside of the legal sphere, right? If you get an email from your landlord saying that they want to evict you, maybe you just leave instead of trying to fight it. There's a lot that goes on there, I think, in terms of power dynamics. But yeah, I think that's a good idea, and I would definitely welcome any recommendations that the group has.
Great. Commissioners, any questions? Maureen?
I had a general question. This is not related to budget. So I've been so as we face Arlington expanding and the affordable housing crisis, we have a current system with the AHIP funding, the Affordable Housing Master Plan. How do you feel about Arlington, looking at things that other jurisdictions have done, like community land trusts, tenant opportunity to own, things outside the box that maybe we haven't fully tried? And especially as the crunch gets worse, shouldn't we be looking at everything on the table?
Yeah. This is my cat. He is upset that I am still on a meeting tonight, but he's a COVID cat, and so he never really learned to be independent. If anyone got pets during COVID, it really taught some bad behaviors. So yes, I think the most direct answer is yes, we need to be looking at a lot of those innovative practices. I think opportunities for ownership is really important, particularly if we're talking about disrupting cycles of generational poverty, right? If you're renting forever and you're not building that equity, where is the next leg up on that ladder? And so making sure we're intentional about building that into our processes is something that I would definitely like to see and explore. And then community land trust is also, I think there's general agreement about wanting to explore that. I think kind of where the questions lie is how and how do you get started on that? Do we own that fully as a county? Do we set up a nonprofit? Do we do some sort of public-private partnership. You know, I think that that's kind of where some of these roadblocks are right now, but it is something that multiple of my colleagues on the board have expressed interest in. And I think that is an avenue that as we continue figuring things out, we should definitely be paying attention to what our peer localities are doing. I know Montgomery County, Maryland has done a lot of innovative stuff in terms of their building of affordable housing. There was an article pretty recently about their publicly funded, they're building publicly funded mixed income, I believe, apartments. And so that way they're actually using the revenue they've generated from that to continue to build more housing. And so, there's things like that as people try things, as people innovate, we should definitely be paying attention. And I think one thing I've really been heartened by in my first 2.5 months here is how on top of things our staff really are. I think that sometimes I feel like, oh, I had this idea, and they're like, yes, we got it. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. And so I don't think we're putting our heads in the sand. I think it's just there's a lot of time and effort that needs to go into doing it right and making sure that, particularly in a time that resources are so scarce, right? And like we have all of these acute problems, and we have people who need eviction prevention and who need the housing vouchers now, but also we need to somehow find the money for the long-term solutions and the future generation, and how do we balance that kind of immediate need and the long-term need in a way that is sustainable over time. Because I think that's the other thing, is we don't want to go all in and so far forward on something that in 5 years we can't keep doing, and then where does that leave us as well? So I'm super supportive. I think we're just still in the thinking phase. And I think part of my interest is really, as we're doing that thinking about what can we do now, I am really glad we're doing like a 2050 thing, because I think we also need to think not just about like right now, but what is the long-term pathway and how do we create that so that 10 years from now, we're not staring down a different set of problems that we could have been thinking about, but didn't.
I had texted a picture of the postcard that I filled out to Maureen for 2050. You can pull it out at your local public library. And it said,
it's also online. It's also online if you want to do it. So.
And it says, what does Arlington look like in 2050? And I said, I don't know if I'll be here in 2050. Like, but seriously, right? Like, if rental costs keep going up and there's no path to home ownership, will I be here in 26 years? I don't know. And then I filled out one from the perspective of if I work, but. I think getting feedback from everyone and doing the long-term planning is super important, because we do have so many problems, but then you can't let that prevent you from the big ideas.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I know at least during my tenure alone, we've lost, I want to say, at least 3 people who have just left Arlington altogether on this commission to either buy a house or to get a more affordable rental home. So, and
I'm a lobbyist. Like, it's not like I'm even like a teacher, a firefighter, or a public employee who's, there has to be a way for people who work in the community and live in the community, younger people who want to stay in the community, like Maureen, and get involved to stay. Mm-hmm. And if not, we're that's so fun. I could join you on this.
Yeah.
Well, in the interest of time, are there any other questions from Maureen before we move on to our next topics?
We look forward to your partnership.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have a winner.
Thank
you. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time. And also just the fact that you all have chosen to engage in this way. I think it's really important that we have people who are committed and interested and partners in this. And so I look forward to working with you all over the next few years, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you for coming,
Thank you,
Maureen, and we'll look forward to speaking with you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, so to round out our meeting today, we have we've already had a little bit of a discussion on civic engagement. Has anyone ever read Bowling Alone?
the seminal work from, what is it, the 90s?
Yes.
About how no one does anything with people anymore.
Yes.
I haven't read it, but I've read a lot of things about bullying.
Yeah, that had
A lot of pieces on bullying.
that had been me for a long time, and then I finally read it a couple months ago. And it was, yeah, I mean, it could have been written today. It just feels so relevant. But that RL Now article was written recently, and I don't know if anybody else got a chance to read it before the meeting, but thank you for sharing that.
So one of the things, there was one other article from Arlington Community Foundation. They had given, everyone got that, right? They had given suggestions, recommendations, budget recommendations. And they were specifically asking for support of AMI, 30% AMI.
Yeah, we talked about the 30% versus 40% already, right? But not in the context of that.
Yeah, not in the comments, speaking in
Yeah.
terms of grants, housing grants. And
Did you have a question in for me for further information on that 30% versus 40? I think we had asked about the difference in cost between.
that's not what I'm speaking. As
Oh, okay.
part of the budget discussion, there were two items.
Mhm.
The very first one was, it was a housing commission's letter.
Right.
And the second one was the Arlington's Community Foundation. They were making a proposal and recommendations. They had 3 points in their.
Do we have the document to pull up?
Yes, I think I sent that document, but if, if they don't have that.
I don't see it.
With this,
I guess I thought they in the annuals.
they should have been sure. No.
It was in March 13th meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Didn't open, I couldn't.
No.
Yeah, I couldn't answer that.
I got this.
Oh, yeah. The Adobe.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, so yeah, I also could,
All right.
I should, wish I had asked.
That's what that's the problem.
I didn't realize that was.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was
Yeah.
from one of the
Okay,
others.
so I can resend that. Let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Adobe's been acting funny,
I've been getting that a ton.
Okay.
That's-
Hmm.
especially DocuSign. Like it.
Yeah, that's.
Well, anyways, so I do think we did talk about this a little bit earlier, and we're committing some of it into the subcommittee's hands. So were there any, Sarah, did you want to talk about your thoughts from the article?
Well, the article was really good and I highly recommend folks read it. It's from RL Now, but it's from their group that does like long-term investment. So I know some people have thoughts. But it was about. Yeah. But it was really good political reporting and the article was about civic federations and very interesting points about renters versus homeowners. But what stuck out to me most is that they seem to have a problem that we're also having in terms of reaching out to residents. Because a lot of pushback that these civic federations have gotten is that, especially in apartment buildings or condo buildings, the only people who are engaging are the people who own. And it's how do you even get the email addresses or the phone numbers for the people who live there? And one of the things, I'll just read the direct quote. RL Now talked to residents who said the county could have a role in bridging the civic association renter divide. It could require via apartment development applications that property managers grant civic associations access for engagement purposes. It could make email distribution lists available to civic associations. And it could set inclusion standards, pushing associations to ensure the homeowner renter split in membership reflects the neighborhood. And that part about access for engagement purposes just seems to, from what I have heard, lined up with what the subcommittee is seeking to do. I haven't attended one of those subcommittee meetings yet, but it stuck out to me that there could be unlikely bedfellows with civic federations if this is something we go to the county board and eventually ask for, in terms of asking or having landlords have the ability to give certain information to renters, which I know it's
On the civic association, I get the courthouse Clarendon one, but I think it's the barrier that it's $10 to be a voting member.
They talked about that
Yes,
too,
but-
yeah,
I'll definitely read that article. I was swamped for it, but
yeah.
I think that's a component to it. For some, it's like, why am I gonna give $10 to this association? I don't know about?
They mentioned a few barriers and others were like, if you're not an owner, if you're not a property owner, you have to then give the buy-in of a certain number of people who are already on the board, and that's extremely exclusionary and inequitable. And I think a lot of them have gotten, away from that, but there's still this perception that exists. Of course, it varies by bylaws per, I think there are like 50 something, 60 something civic federations, but or civic associations. So just recommend reading the article. It was interesting. And is the outreach subcommittee works on it, something to consider in terms of potential allies. We go to the county board with the request.
Yeah, no, I agree. I thought it was a good article. It rang, true to my experiences, had to be involved with a group like this and having recently read Bowling Alone, which I recommend, although it's quite
There's
long.
another good article in the Atlantic about recent trends in community engagement post-pandemic that I would recommend. It's
Yeah.
probably a modern day short if you don't want to read all of them. It's scary, honestly, but yeah, I can.
Yes, that'd be great. Yeah, and I do think that outreach subcommittee, the one pager that we've been working on for a long time, and I unfortunately have to report that I received Ryan Whitaker's resignation a couple of days ago. So we'll be looking to fill 2 landlord positions, but also have someone else, take over the work that he had been leading in that subcommittee. And I think we should, we've talked about it enough. We should just be able to push that across the finish line. So if someone's interested, you could talk to me after the meeting and helping make sure that effort gets completed. But it relates directly to what we're talking about. Like how do we reach those people? Well, at least for CAP properties, we could recommend to the county board that the one pager or an equivalent be included in the rental materials along with the lease that each.
Get notice about lead paint in my building.
Exactly.
Can easily be slotted in right under.
It's like, yeah.
Oh, great, I'm surrounded by lead paint, but
Yeah.
at least there's a tenant landlord commission I can go to about it.
Does the county have the authority to mandate that, or?
Well, the article talks about issues with that too, is that it gets into privacy.
Mandate what exactly?
Like a one pager be included in like lease documents?
So,
Because I know the state
Virginia
has
has
some.
all-
I think we're still discussing.
last year.
Sorry about that.
Before you,
Depending who you talk to, they do not, because it's not a life, it's not like lead paint, it's not it's not a life threatening. And I think there's an age-old question that there's no answer to discussing how do you get more input. I mean, there's small landlords, there's landlords that don't have people's emails, that have just a
Yeah.
couple of properties and have a locked door to get in. And then, like,
Yeah.
you're gonna have to ask them to get in and to post something even in the
Yeah.
hallway, like, or distribute something. And so it's not as easy as, CAP properties may be different because we have lists.
Yeah.
They are, but it's not an easy question.
but to catch you up on what the commission has done, and the reason everyone was laughing is because we requested an opinion attorney on that very subject, and they gave us the most, I don't even mind saying on the record, they gave us the most milquetoast equivocal answer you could. It was like, imagine what a lawyer's, would say, the most consummate lawyer. Well, it depends, and but it was almost as short as that, and it was a frustrating. And we had tried for a number of months to get that opinion in the first place, and they hadn't been rendering it. Anyway, point is, I think we should push for it anyway. Whether or not we have the power to include it in all county renter along with leases is one thing. Whether we can pass along a one pager to count units, I think is pretty clear. And so anyway, we just need to push that across the finish line. I'd love to be able to give a recommendation within 2 months to the county board. So let's talk. I don't know who's still on the outreach committee. Kira, you are, right?
Yep.
Is there anyone else on it?
Maybe that- Again,
I think we need, I think
I think the problem is that
he
was the leading it.
We more subcommittee that we previously had, we merged one and then we haven't done it from there.
Well,
Before we go any further.
The one that Ryan.
Once, you want to ask yourself, what would be the difference between this one page that's being produced and the materials and the share in terms of what staff?
I am agnostic as to whether we produce our own or use exactly what staff has already done. That's for the subcommittee to decide. I just want us to decide and then put together a recommendation for the county board that like our optimal, in my opinion, would be that they push to require it for all renters in Arlington. B, if they don't want to go that far and they're worried about legal authority, CAF units, like.
Test it with CAP.
And C, they should be able to have an opt-in program for all landlords that want to participate. Good, and we can offer incentives even if we want to landlords to do that.
Instead of, I guess, kicking this to the subcommittee, since it seems like it's just a committee of two, I think you need.
I've never been on the.
Oh,
I don't even know if my
okay.
technical.
It's like it sounded one. Can we just get the materials? Or, I mean, I don't want to speak for the agenda for April, but if we
Yeah.
can carve time,
Let's just do it. Let's
and
push it across the
we
finish.
can have that discussion and then finalize whatever the final motion is in May and put it forward to the county.
I hope that wasn't locking us in.
The universe said we must decide.
Figure it out.
Because it seems like you guys already
yeah,
have like the
yeah.
finished product.
I like that.
Like goes back down.
I agree. Let's do it. Let's make some space in the April agenda for that. Let's put 30 minutes in for it. Can
It
you,
would also be great if we could like have in one place any minutes from those subcommittee meetings or like written summaries, the lawyers, just like in one.
Rolda, would you get together the minutes, the lawyer's opinion? As long as you're doing it, give them the angry email that I wrote.
I remember. I have that.
And
The minutes should be up there. Unless they were taken down.
The minutes should
are
be-
public record.
But just pull it up together in one place and also include that one pager that you're referring to that staff put together already. Because I'm fine using that.
I would trust Don.
It's actually not a one page because it can't all fit up.
Oh.
It's a different form.
That's a question.
So that has always been the thing, and if we have been talking about a one page, but being practical, all of the information.
An info resource, a resource page, a resource. Materials, whatever we end up calling it.
So just make sure that goes out after the meeting sometime in the next week or so to commissioners.
So we're all up to.
Yeah,
So
let's get everybody up
we
to
can
speed
really
ahead
dive
of
in.
Yes. That's our homework for the.
Okay, subcommittee report from Andrew, anything?
We met with Samu and Bugata regarding their partnerships and how they interact with the community, so we got a better understanding of their day-to-day. We are planning to meet with Eric tomorrow. I think that's how you pronunciate his name, who's the CPHD compliance officer for the county. At our upcoming meeting on Monday, March 25th at 7 p.m. And also, a lot of the landlords that do serve on the subcommittee apparently have lots of great reviews about Eric, so I look forward to that discussion.
Good, yeah, I'm looking forward to it as
The
well.
subcommittee meeting here.
Yes, normally it's across and
101.
yeah, they're named after flowers, right? I think that's a
Yeah.
Everyone's always welcome to come to.
Yeah, I just never get like notices of those. I don't know if I'm missing them or since I'm not technically on the subcommittee, if they don't go out to people.
Well,
Send it out today.
yeah.
I'm happy to join.
That's a good rule of thumb. Okay, good. So that's the subcommittee reports. Rhoda, Hector, anything from staff?
Just the same date for the community development tool that I sent out.
Yeah, thank you.
So you can decide. if you have to,
The bus,
The bus tour.
April 3rd.
Maybe it's another project.
Right. And I've announced, unfortunately, Ryan has personal and professional conflicts, so he's resigning. We're looking for 2 landlord replacements. So, and I usually talk with Maureen about, recruiting people. It's always a difficult thing, but if you have people in your networks, that would be fantastic. And finally, I'm happy to name Andrew as my vice chair to move forward to help me manage the workload and sure things get done. So thank you for agreeing to do that. All right, I think that's all I've got. Anybody else? Great, can I get a,
Adjournment?
yep, second, any opposed?
Second.
All right. That
Thanks.
concludes the
Bye,
March
everybody.
15th, 2024 meeting. We'll see you all next.